Hello folks, this week was Patch Week, and with the launch of Player Housing Early Access, possibly the most technically complex new feature ever added to the game, I think I probably wasn't the only person who was half expecting it to be a pretty rough patch day. Thankfully, that turned out not to be the case. When servers come up after maintenance, they were very stable and playable. For Player Housing itself, the public neighbourhood finder was clearly struggling under the load of everyone trying to get their first home, and required quite a bit of persistence in order to get one. And as the evening peak rolled in, guilds were told by the game that they didn't exist. But once we pushed past that housing creation boss, the housing experience has been excellent, with none of the lag or crashes that were evident in testing either on the PTR or the Midnight Beta. Overall, I think this has been one of the better minor patch releases of recent years stability-wise. There is still the occasional odd glitch in the housing system, but given its scope and complexity, that was always going to be the case. Overall, the new housing feature has been very warmly received by the majority of the player base who have tried it out so far, with the most prominent complaint being the limits placed on exterior decoration. It's my understanding that those limits are at least in part due to technical constraints, as the dev team watch how player housing plays out in practice, and I would not be surprised if we do see an increase in Midnight, albeit I doubt it will ever reach a level that will satisfy the most hardcore of housing enthusiasts. Looking beyond player housing, and I found the new storylines pretty enjoyable overall, albeit the Pandaren Heritage questline did feel a little bit undercooked, not really ever explaining why the spirits of the Lost Isle were a bit upset in the first place. For the main patch content, Shadowlands Time Walking is a decent addition, albeit it's one that is not massively exciting to me, and so it's fairly fortunate that leveling up my new player house and collecting all that decor does look like it will be quite a big time sink. Now, for those folks who are still getting to grips with player housing and especially leveling the housing system up, currently housing XP is only obtainable from collecting brand new decor, and for that I recommend getting the add-on Homebound, which provides a comprehensive list of quests, achievements and vendors which will award you housing items. And whenever you do gain a new housing level, do make sure to visit the housing contractor in the centre of your neighbourhood to ask him to send his team out to do the upgrade for you. One very useful source of housing items is Legion Remix, with the vendor Demelius now hanging out in the Bronze Dragonfly area with a bunch of Legion related housing reward. And after the remix is over, those items will be moving to a new vendor in the Dalaran underbelly, so don't worry too much if you're short of bronze or are just feeling a bit burned out on remix. We're not quite done with the War Within yet, as we do still have the Brawlers Guild opening up next week. And for fans of holiday events, the Wanderers Festival micro holiday will be taking place in Krasarang Wilds on Pandaria this Sunday the 7th. This is one of the less interesting micro holidays, with not a huge amount to do beyond lighting a lantern and setting it afloat, but it is still worth a visit if you're looking for some extra Traveller's Log progress. And if you're trying to level up any professions, perhaps for those housing items, Sunday also sees the return of the Dark Moon Fair, whose profession quests offer a quick way to get some bonus skill ups. But moving over now to the Midnight expansion, and Blizzard have this week shared a little bit more information about the release schedule for the upcoming Season 1 content. As usual with a brand new expansion, we are going to be getting 2 weeks to get our warbands leveled up and enjoy all of that new open world content before the season kicks off on March the 17th, with the usual start of expansion Heroic Week for the raid. This will see the Voidspire and Dreamrift raids opening up on normal and heroic difficulty, along with LFR Wing 1 for Voidspire and LFR from Dreamrift. And we will also see the launch of the Season 1 dungeon lineup on Heroic and Mythic 0 difficulty, which sounds at first glance a little bit strange. More on that shortly, along with the arrival of Bountiful Delves and the PvP Season 1. The following week, March the 24th, will see the launch of the Race to World First proper, with both Voidspire and Dreamrift raids opening up on Mythic difficulty, along with story mode and LFR Wing 2 for Voidspire, and finally the launch of the Mythic Plus Season 1. The week of March the 31st will see the final raid, March of Quel'Danas, opening up in normal, heroic and mythic difficulty alongside the third wing of Voidspire LFR, and finally on April the 7th we'll be getting story mode and LFR for March of Quel'Danas. Now, this announcement made no mention of a story mode for the Dreamrift raid, but I do recall that the developers did mention in an interview that there would be a story mode for all of the raids, so I do assume that this is just an oversight, and my personal guess is that we'll see story mode for the Dreamrift on the week of the 24th of March alongside the Voidspire story mode. The other surprising part of the announcements, at least on the surface, is that Heroic and Mythic Zero dungeons will be opening on the week of the 17th. 2 weeks would be a very long time with only normal dungeons available, and runs against another developer interview that suggested that we could expect the return of the Mythic Zero World Tours in the pre-season fortnight. Now, what I think is probably happening is that in that pre-season fortnight, we will, similar to the War Within, be getting access to all 8 of the new Midnight dungeons, rather than the Season 1 mix of 4 new dungeons and 4 returners. In the War Within, that access was limited to Heroic only, and while I, and I know many others, did enjoy a period of relative downtime before we dived into the seasonal content proper, that limitation did get a lot of pushback from the more competitive players who felt like they lacked much content to get their teeth into at the start of the expansion. In developer interviews, it has been heavily implied that the 2 weeks of Mythic Zero World Tour will be making a return, and if it does, I'd personally expect that that will be starting out with the new Midnight Dungeon lineup before switching over to the Season 1 lineup for the season start on March the 17th. In the past, I've found the Mythic Zero World Tour rounds to be a lot of fun, but this combined with no Mythic Plus and Heroic Week would mean effectively we'll have 3 weeks of a Mythic Zero World Tour, which I kind of feel might end up being a bit much, especially as after 2 weeks of Mythic Zero, the chances of getting meaningful gear upgrades in the third week will be pretty low. The World of Warcraft developers have always struggled with Mythic Plus during raid Heroic weeks. In the past, end of dungeon rewards were capped, if I remember correctly, around +5 or +6, which never felt good at all. But for me, neither did delaying the Mythic Plus start until the Mythic raid opens up. This isn't an easy problem to solve, at least as long as that raid Heroic week does continue to exist for the first week of a new expansion. Anyways, after last week's Thanksgiving lull, it was straight back into the weekly beta release cycle this week, and that has allowed us to get a very first look at the changing costs for the new Transmog system. The most controversial element of the first reveal was of course the cost of applying new Transmog appearances onto our characters, and as promised, this has been reduced, now costing us around 2,000 gold. This, I think, is a lot better than the previous 5,000 to 6,000 gold. It is still a bit higher than the current Transmog cost, but with max gear players' costs already getting close to around 1.2k, it doesn't feel entirely unreasonable either. And as for the costs of unlocking slots, the promised increase to 50 slots has not yet been implemented on the beta, but we did get a look at the new cost for the first 20 slots. As before, the first 2 slots are completely free, and the most expensive slots now cap out at 20,000 gold, with unlocking all 20 slots costing just under 163,000 gold. This is very close to the promised 80% reduction in cost, indicating that the extra 30 slots are very likely to bump that cost up, probably by quite a lot. So if you're a completionist who must have every slot unlocked, I do suggest that you start investing in some very serious gold making. That said, 20 slots are likely to be more than enough for the vast majority of players, so the people who are affected by whatever the cost will finally be are likely to be the extreme outliers. Now, moving on to housing, my own personal little annoyance in the patch 11.27 housing early access has been the new harvesting hatchet, which unlocks access to the ability ability to farm lumber. Currently, we can only see and therefore harvest lumber when we have this hatchet in our bags, meaning that it does swallow up a precious slot. And I'm genuinely mystified why wood cutting wasn't made a secondary profession with the ability to track lumber being added to the minimap. And so the very good news is that when the Midnight pre-patch does launch, while lumber is not being made a profession, we will still be able to just right-click the hatchet and be permanently taught the ability to find lumber, meaning that we will be getting that precious bag slot back eventually. Now, I suspect that in coming weeks, as we level up our homes and max out our current room and decor budgets, we are going to start to be looking forward to getting our hands on even more capacity. And this week's beta build did give us a very first look at what that will be with the addition of another 4 housing levels. This preview in the beta is fairly obviously not complete, as the rewards for the new levels are limited to just increasing the cap, with currently no sign of any other rewards. And we also seem to be getting fewer new levels at the start of the expansion than we got for the start of early access, which just feels wrong to me, unless of course those extra levels are just for the pre-patch period. So do bear in mind that these numbers will probably change, but interior decoration will be going up from the current 2050 to 3,340, and room placement budget from 43 up to 75. That latter is probably the more impactful change, as inside my own home I am finding the number of rooms to be much more limiting than decor placement. Just as with housing early access, there is an extra level 10 with a coming soon label, a very clear indication that this won't be the end of housing progression. I'm personally hoping that this is something that will continue to be added to for the entire duration of Midnight. I do get the desire for instant gratification, but at the same time, I do kind of like the idea of my character's new home gradually expanding over time. Now, looking beyond player housing, and Wowhead have managed to data find some new achievements for one of the new open world events, Abyss Anglers. This event has been pretty broken on the beta, so we haven't really been able to figure out exactly what is involved, but it appears that during the event we'll get a vehicle UI with unique skills, along with an oxygen mechanic, which most likely means that when that oxygen runs out, the event will end. We will be able to earn upgrades, including better abilities and even more oxygen, allowing us to eventually stay in the event longer. We have seen that mechanic where we can stay in an event for longer and longer as we progress before. Back in Legion with the Withered army training, in fact, a feature that I personally wasn't ever a fan of, but I do know that quite a lot of people did enjoy at the start of Legion. And finally, it would not be a news update on Midnight without at least some mention of add-ons. About a month ago, the developers of ElvUI, the popular full user interface replacement add-on, announced that they were putting development on hold, in part due to, at the time, the lack of any meaningful options to modify unit frames. This was obviously pretty disappointing to many fans, but there was always the hope that development might restart. And that has turned out to be the case, with the ElvUI team this week announcing that they are now working on support for Midnight, with many elements of ElvUI already updated for the beta. The main remaining gaps are nameplates and unit frames, with the team sharing that they plan to make a final decision on those closer to the release of the pre-patch. Unit frames, especially the group frames, are still very much in flux on the beta, with Blizzard obviously still working to try and update them. So a wait and see approach for those is not a massive surprise to me. However, given the success of add-ons like Platinator, demonstrating what can already be done with nameplates, I'm a bit more surprised that the Elv developers aren't already starting work in those. Nevertheless, as a long-term fan of ElvUI, this was very good news for me. I have been trying out alternatives in the beta and getting some great results from them, but those would have required replacing ElvUI with 7 extra add-ons. So I am keeping my fingers crossed that ElvUI will be in a feature complete state by the time the 12.0 pre-patch comes around. And returning to nameplates, for Mythic Plus players, the likely loss of the ability to colour enemies to highlight more dangerous NPCs and ad packs has been a bit of a hot topic of feedback. This week, the Platinator add-on introduced a brand new option to colour code enemies based on their status in Midnight, identifying higher health and damage lieutenant adds or those who have access to magic casts. Now, Blizzard has specifically called out the colour coding of Plater and Mythic Plus is one of the things that they really wanted to restrict. So my natural first reaction to this development was that it would very likely get wrecked by the devs. But it appears that the developer of the Platinator add-on has been informed by Blizzard that they are very likely to be okay with what Platinator is doing. On the surface, this does seem a little bit contradictory, but it is worth keeping in mind that this new version of color coding is much more limited than what was originally possible with the Plater profiles, which currently in the War Within can individually color code every single NPC based on its name or identifier. In contrast, with this new version, it is limited to making use of whatever information about the NPCs Blizzard chooses to share with the add-ons, which in effect puts the developers in control of what NPCs can be highlighted in this way. My rough understanding is that the WoW devs have heard and taken on board negative feedback from Mythic Plus players about what they describe as a sea of red plates, and this does kind of feel like a potentially developing pragmatic middle ground between the early alpha complete lockdown of everything stance and the current War Within do whatever we want situation. And this does make me wonder if we might start to see some other similarly pragmatic relaxations in the near future, especially for other hot topics like healers group frames. Either way, I am relieved to see the WoW dev team taking this particular stance. It is inevitable that add-on developers will find some innovative new approaches, and one concern that I had was that we might end up seeing something of a knee-jerk reaction from the developers to such developments, something that could potentially have a very disruptive knock-on effect on our gameplay. And that's it for this week. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the new patch. Are you now a housing stan, or is it time to be taking a break from WoW? Let me know down below. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for updates. My links in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.